Welcome to Drupal and SEO, designing and building with SEO in mind. My name is DJ Kadamus, and I am a digital project manager at Oomph, based in Providence. One quick note, I know there were kind of competing talks this year. Jim Birch gave a talk on SEO and UX yesterday. There's a lot of good stuff in that. That talk covers a lot more like concepts of SEO and big picture, and this will get a little more like nitty gritty. So if you want to check that out, I highly recommend that talk. A little bit about me. I am a project manager at Oomph. I work with delivery and retainer clients on Drupal 7 and Drupal 8 sites. Still more Drupal 7, but hopefully more Drupal 8 soon. I'm also kind of our SEO strategist, and I'm involved with all of our delivery projects. In the beginning, just a little bit of discovery and kind of chiming in throughout the project to help make sure that whatever content we're eventually putting on that page ranks for SEO. And when no one's looking, I really do like working on Drupal config and trying to do some like actual technical work, but usually that gets frowned upon. Also, we're hiring at Oomph. We're always hiring, so if you're interested, just take a look at the link. There's always some jobs up there. Okay, so what we'll cover today. So we're going to start with a quick overview of SEO best practices. Then we're going to talk about design and just like what designers need to think about when they're wireframing and designing websites, especially the user experience and how that relates to SEO. And then what engineers need to remember when they're building everything out. Specifically the next point, which is like we're going to talk a little bit about the Metatags module and why that's your best friend. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some like good and bad SEO throughout. Okay, so just a quick overview, well not so quick, review of SEO. Before we jump in, I'm just going to say that whether you think you know it or not, you're all pretty much SEO experts if you work in our industry. I know people who are SEO professionals tend to kind of like hog the limelight there, but basically like if you're technically smart and you Google things, you're pretty much an SEO expert, and you just need to kind of put it all into practice. So what I'm hoping for with this talk is that not that you'll be like, oh, I learned a million new things. It's more like, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense. I knew that. Let me just do this now. So let's kind of take a step back. So there's a connection right now between user experience and SEO. So like what you write on pages directly appears in the search engine result snippet and influences page rank. So here's a website we work with, and if I were to Google BCBS Medicare, I'm going to see this first link, and you see that text there that's Medicare is a federal health insurance available for eligible individuals, blah, blah, blah. And if you were to navigate to the page, the first thing you see at the top is what is Medicare and that exact copy. So that's the meta description, or it's being pulled in right now just automatically as a node description in the Metatags module. And that's kind of just how everything appears on search right now. So there's a direct connection between what you put on your site and how it appears on Google. And regardless of whether your content person likes it or not, their content they write should be searchable. Like you should be writing content thinking about how is someone going to be able to find this. So when you're going through content and when you're building, wireframing, designing, what have you, you just need to keep one thing in mind, and that is Google controls all, and they want to keep you on Google. Like that's pretty much it. There are 16 different kinds of snippets that can appear on a single Google result page, and they'll all be kind of familiar to you. And everything has one of two goals for Google. One is they want to keep you on a Google product. So if you have something for maps or video or local pack, all that information is just going to give it to you right there on Google, or move you to a Google product like YouTube or Google Plus, RIP in peace. Or what they're going to do is push for you to generate a profit. Google is a business and they make money on ads. So that's why when you Google stuff, you'll see that like sometimes the first 5 things all say add next to them. And so that's one thing that you kind of have to keep in mind while you're doing anything, is just you have to understand that yes, you want your content to rank well, but Google is still going to control everything. They hold all the cards, and you just kind of have to play within their game. All right, that's not working anymore. Okay, so I want to talk about just like a little bit about the snippets and how this stuff all appears. So on the left, you have, a knowledge panel. This is Neil deGrasse Tyson, and just like look at all this content that Google is pulling from, and this is all stuff that you can rank for in your OG tags, in your Metatags module, everything. You can make sure that all of this gets pulled in. So like if you're just going top to bottom, you have your image pack, you have the user's title or the person's title and their name, and that link right there goes to Wikipedia, or now this one is the hidden planetarium. Usually when you Google someone, it goes to their Wikipedia page. Then you have like their description about who they are, and then even you have events that they're going to be attending, which is wild that Google is pulling that in, that if you Google someone, that they're going to know all this. And you can set up your content to rank for all of this. And then even quotes, and this block goes even further. And so that's the knowledge panel, and that's probably the most common Google snippet you're going to see. And then on the right is the other super popular one, and it's a local pack. So a lot of times when someone Googles something, it's a long tail search of blank near me, restaurants near MIT, coffee shops near me, what have you. And what Google wants you to do is, especially if you have a local business and you want traffic, what they're going to do is prevent that by just feeding all the important information to the user right there. And if you click on it, it's going to direct you to Google Maps and not your website. And they want you to then use your device and find them and find the business directly. So they're not necessarily totally hurting you, but they're going to be hurting your web traffic. And so I found this one just interesting overall. If you Google the existential questions in life, like what is Drupal, you're going to get results chock full of snippets. So this top result is actually, if this thingy worked, it's an in-depth article, so that's why you see that you have 300 characters in that top snippet, whereas on the about one, you only get 150. So when you're writing content like Drupal in the Metatags module will say like write this between 100 and 320 characters. If you're trying to rank, you can write more content and have that appear at the top in that first result page, in that first result. And then you go below and you have the related questions snippet that's become super popular with Google. Basically, the questions that used to be at the bottom of the results page are now in the middle or at the top. And why this is important is that users are more and more searching long tail keywords. It was something like, I think it was last year, it was 95% of Google searches had an average search per month of under 10. So people are searching super individualistic terms that aren't searched, that aren't repeated a lot. And so what Google is trying to do is feed you, those appropriate questions, which is why if you talk to an SEO strategist right now, they're going to say, put everything in a question. If you have a heading, put that in a question, and so that will rank, and then you answer that question below. I disagree. You don't necessarily have to write the question directly in order to rank well for it, and we're going to talk about how what the point is for Google. But anyway, just moving down, then you still have that regular snippet, that about, and that's only 155 characters. Then you have a video snippet, and these are all YouTube videos. And then to the right, you have a knowledge panel that has tons of stuff, and Google really customizes it. So if you look at that knowledge panel, you have what's it written in PHP, what's the stable release when I took the screenshot, who are the developers, the Drupal community, the license, the operating system. It's super custom, and so I know that was kind of a lot of information, and so what's the point? So the first point is One, I really love that lowercase w in the Playfair font when you italicize. I'm just going to go ahead and say that. But the point is to engage with Google. Google's focus now, and I guess Bing too, if that's your flavor, is user experience. They want to give the best answer to the user, no matter what the length of content is. So if you talk to, an SEO strategist, they'll say, if you write a blog post, it shouldn't be more than 400 words. It should have 2 H2s on it, 3 H3s. Every link should be formatted this way. It has to be perfect. And that's not true. Maybe that's to rank if you don't have good content. Those are ways to cheat your way through. But if you're writing good content, you'll rank no matter what. So what I always like to say is whenever you're publishing something on your website, if you ask it as a question, how long does it take to answer that question? At OOMF, one of our coworkers writes a lot about accessibility. And if you ask like an existential question, like what is accessibility? That takes a long time to answer. So that answer should be long. And you should have all the content that it takes to actually answer the question. Okay. So I know I mentioned that user experience still matters. But that's still not the end-all be-all. Like there's some of those classic SEO tropes that still really matter, and you can kind of split this up to on-site SEO and off-site SEO. So and then there's like for the on-site SEO, you can break that down further into non-technical work and technical work. So some of the non-technical stuff that still matters is your metadata. So that is your title tag, your meta description, the open graph tags, all of that information that you're using the Metatags module to handle if you're writing content, that's still really important. You need to abide by all those rules still. Internal linking still matters. So you want your website to communicate with itself. So if you are publishing content, one thing I really recommend for anyone, whether it's on a basic page or a blog post, is if you reference something that you also talk about, just link to that page. So if you're writing a blog about accessibility and you quote something about how accessibility will be in Drupal 9 and you have a blog post about Drupal 9, just link that there. Keep the user on your site, but that also helps with improving your own credibility. Google actually sees that as a positive ranking factor. Don't do it too much. As with anything SEO, too much is, you want to just find that balance. Alt text is still important for SEO, so that's for image SEO if you want your images to be found in a Google search. And then alt text is still really important for accessibility. There's a lot of SEO and accessibility items that get intertwined. Conversion rate optimization still matters. Google still sees if you have a form on that page, they want to know how well that performs, especially if you're tracking that in Google Analytics. If they see that your form has, a million hits and has a 0.01% conversion rate, they're going to say, oh, that's not really that credible. So we don't necessarily want to feed that content as much as possible. And that's especially important if you're going to gate any content. So say you want someone to sign up for a webinar or to read an ebook that you have to fill out a quick form to access. That's still really important to make sure that users are still getting a decent success rate. And then duplicate content. Don't do it. That's the simplest way to say. If you have something on your site, don't copy and paste copy anywhere. You're just going to end up competing with yourself for the same search terms. And then some of the technical stuff that still matters. So your schema.org markup. So that is setting up a sitemap, and in the XML sitemap, we're going to talk about that later when we talk more about the development. That still matters. Google needs to be able to find your links. And they cannot find anything on your site if you don't allow robots.txt. So that just needs to be engaged. Let the robots in, except for the pages that you want to hide from Google, like form result pages. Page speed, still super important. This could be its own talk. If you want to learn more about that, I just recommend plugging your URL into gtmetrics.com and just seeing what it comes up with, and then it'll give you all the recommendations you need. But that's a whole pit of despair. Redirects still matter. You want to format them correctly. People are afraid of using redirects in SEO. They think it's terrible. That's not true. Some redirects are okay. You don't want redirects everywhere. If I was only promoting that inf.is URL on all of my content and 301 redirected that to every piece of content on the site, that would be horrible. But some is fine. Just don't overdo it. You still want to review your HTTP status codes. So, this is something you can do in Google Search Console, which we'll talk about. You want numbers in the 200s. You don't want anything in the 400s or 500s. And again, we'll talk about Google Search Console and how that helps. The URL structure still matters. So, you want to keep it limited, and you want it to make sense with the parent item. And the way, we'll talk about this more, but the way it relates is, so say you have your menu item and you have a client you're working with and they want to put a menu item that's like custom solutions and enterprise solutions or something like that, or custom and enterprise solutions. That's going to be translated to a URL, and then any page below that already has lost like 50 characters. And so your URL you want to keep within 90 characters or so. So if you have a poor URL structure, that's going to negatively affect your SEO. And then domains still matter. Use top-level domains, your .coms and such. I don't want to attack anyone here, but if anyone is using like the .agency domain, that's not a good thing for SEO, or we've seen no actual improvement for anyone who's actually used that. Some more stuff that still matters. Offsite SEO, so your link building, you still want people to link your content. That's still probably the most important thing that you can do. Referrals are amazing for SEO. Social media marketing, so that's just an easy way to get referrals. So, you want to link to your site, and if you're good at social media and you're investing in that and you start to stir the pot, that will actually help your SEO in general, because then people will Google your content and just Google your brand name, which leads us to the next item, which is brand mentions. So that's basically just staying on top of your content when people don't necessarily link at you or at you on social media. There are tools that you can use for this that kind of crawl and make sure that whenever someone mentions your brand, that you can keep track of it. And then staying on top of how your authority is viewed. So this is in reference to domain authority, and Google will swear that domain authority has nothing to do with SEO, but it kind of does. If you plug into your website into a service like Moz or SEMrush, they're going to give you a domain authority number out of 100, and if your number is low, you're probably not going to have good SEO. Other stuff that matters. Local SEO, so if you have a local company, you want to focus on your all of your content in the neighboring area. So we're in Providence. If we were an agency and we were a coffee shop, it would make zero sense for me to go after like the general term coffee shop. I would probably just go after coffee shop Providence or coffee shop Doran Street or something like that. And then research is still really important. Keyword research. Looking for ranking opportunities, ranking changes, that's all really important. That's all stuff that you should keep up with. Google changes their algorithm all the time, and you want to make sure that you can catch that as soon as possible. Okay, so we just covered a lot, and a lot of that I just covered, I kind of ran through pretty quickly. Jim's talk covers a lot of that, and if you have more questions about it, talk after, and I can send you some really good resources. Okay, so what designers need to think about when wireframing, and I should have put and designing. So the first thing that a designer should do is talk to some sort of strategist or project manager, or just do it themselves, where you're getting data. And so I'm going to talk about one of our clients right now that we're in the process of doing a redesign for. It's the American Veterinary Medical Association. I'll call it AVMA, just to prevent that mouthful. And so the first thing we did for them is we ran a Google Search Console report. And you can just see exactly in the tool what people are Googling and how they are finding your content. So clicks is someone Googled that term and then clicked on the link. And then impressions is when someone Googles you and just scrolls right past. But they can get the answer in the impression. So it's still important. And so the way you should be thinking about this from a design perspective is that if someone is Googling something and you have good brand recognition, they're going to go to your site and also try to find that content directly if they know who you are. So if you are the authority in distemper, which is up there, which is like a dog disease, someone who knows that, oh, I'm just going to go to avma.org and try to find distemper there instead of Googling it because I know they're the authority. So when you're wireframing and designing, you need to be thinking about these terms because this is how someone is engaging with your entirety of your content, like the whole suite of it. And then, so, you know, the idea is to just run this report at the beginning. It's a free service, and it will, it will start your conversation around IA, wireframing, and all that. And then just like as a kind of a weird note I've noticed when I was looking at this, there are way more dog terms than cat terms, even though those are the two most popular pets. I don't know, it's just something we noticed that dog people are way more into Googling stuff than cat people.
Even dogs get into more things than cats.
That's true. Speaking of which, here's my dog. Her name is Honey. John and Kathy up there have met her a few times. She's the greatest dog of all time. That's a fact. Okay, so where were we? You need to just be thinking about this data and how people are engaging with your content on and off-site, because these terms reflect how they're thinking about your content when they're not looking at the web, if they are thinking about it, and how they're going to be engaging with your content when they actually land on your site. So here is the IA that we started to develop for them. And so at least this is our process. We start with the IA, then we go into wireframing, and then we go into designing. And when you start building out the IA, and this is version 1 actually, not what we settled on. So the top level items in the navigation need to be clear and distinct. And you also need to be thinking about how the URLs will be created and how it will work from a functional perspective. So, for example, which makes this site particularly challenging is they have a ton of content, and this is definitely a mega menu. There's no way avoiding it. There was no way avoiding it for the client, so we kind of had to just kind of lean into it and say, okay, we're going to end up with a mega menu anyway. How's the best way we can limit this, make this the most functional as possible? And we were thinking of, okay, what are people searching? You know, they're searching for all of those, I can just go back real quick. They're searching for all of these terms that are like blog post related and kind of like evergreen content. And then you also have that AVMA convention people are also really interested in. So we were thinking like, okay, we definitely want like a topics section that covers everything that someone will need to know if they're a pet owner. We also want like an education section. We have resources for veterinarians. That was really important for the client. And then we had other things like the calendar to cover events. You know, their publications still really important. And the about page is always very important for SEO because that's how you get that knowledge panel. When someone Googles AVMA and all that information comes up, that should be pulling it directly from your about pages. So here is what we actually turned the menu into. And so just kind of going through this is the resources and tools. And then if you look at the top right there, there's literally a section called pet owner. And if you were to think about the content and the URL structure, if you were to click that and then click through to something about distemper, one of their top search terms, it would be /pet owners with a dash in between the two words, /canine/distemper. So that provides a simple URL path that Google can understand, that a user can understand, and that's how you get your content to rank. So I know there's probably a lot of you who are like, yeah, duh, like that makes sense, but it's surprising how much you don't see that. And so just kind of moving left to right, you got to think about all of these items as a searchable term and how a user is going to be engaging with this and how you can provide the best user experience for them. So again, membership, that's a super high conversion rate term. It's not everyone in the world is going to be Googling how to become an AVMA member, but if you're in the community, you want to become a member. So that's something that was really important, and that's something that a person would pretty much search. Advocacy, so that was kind of just more of like a business goal. People who are interested in finding out what AVMA advocates wants to actually move forward with that and just be able to find that easily. Education and careers, again, low traffic, but a super high conversion rate for someone who's an aspiring vet. This is, everything you would need to know when you're going through that process, through veterinary school and then trying to find a job. And then, moving past resources and tools, events, again, that AVMA convention is one of the most searched terms, so we've got to make that easy to find. News, so if you want to publish news items and blog posts, always important for SEO. And the about, pretty self-explanatory, but super important for SEO in that that's where all of that content for the knowledge panel is going to be pulled from. And so when you start to build out your site, you need to be thinking about how a user will engage with this site, because people now just are using the Chrome app or the Google app on their phone, or they have a Google Pixel phone, and everything is so intertwined with how you're searching on the web with your website that this is kind of common sense stuff. But when you actually think about it, you want to make sure that you're just considering it every step of the way. Now, please pretend you did not see that beautifully designed menu, because here's a wireframe that's all black and white. And so this is the time when, during the life cycle of a project, that we see SEO starts to be forgotten. When you start to wireframe, then go to design, then go to build, you start to see this gradual forgetfulness that starts to occur. So you're starting to lay out content, you're starting to develop all of your wires. So you need to make sure that this makes sense from the user perspective. So the kind of super important rule, and going back to that question of that, like the physical question that people are searching into Google and those related question snippets, is here is how you rank for them. You want to take your content and reframe it as a question. So on the right, you have AVMA's commitment. That's about, how they kind of engage with the pet community. And if someone were to switch that and say, what is AVMA's commitment in Google, does that first line of content answer that question? So you're not writing out all of your content in wireframes. If you are, you're probably crazy, but good for you. And so that's what you need to be thinking about, is if I were to translate that heading into a search term, does the next line, would that correlate into a Google results snippet? And so, on the left you have resources for veterinarians. That's something that someone reasonable would Google, and you need to, put yourself in their shoes with you do your user personas and all that, and think about how someone, what's their intent, and feeding them the next best line. Becomes your meta description. And when they land on your page, what should they be seeing? If you have the intent, what are some resources for an aspiring veterinarian? Go to that page. What are they seeing? That's kind of what you should be thinking about. And so, during this stage of the project, you definitely won't have final content. That's totally okay. I think the Right now, you just want to make sure that you're figuring out your headings, you're mapping out your ideal behaviors that came up in your story mapping and user personas and all that during discovery. If you haven't done any of that and started wireframing, that's not necessarily a bad thing. You can always kind of go back and change it while it's still relatively easy to change. And the most important thing to do during this stage of the project is to find out what pages you want to rank for what. So you kind of talk, if it's easier to think about that you have an SEO wealth. So you have, say, like $100 that you can spend per page. How do you want those terms on the page that someone would search for to rank? You don't want to put a ton of paragraph elements on the page with 11 H2s and so much body content because you're spreading yourself too thin. What I would recommend is you have, your target keyword per page. That kind of gets 75% of what your the page goal is, and then kind of spread the rest around. And you want to make sure that every page has one single goal for the user, unless it's like an overview page. Obviously, you want that will lead a user away. That's fine. But if you're thinking about for just your generic page, like where you did that distemper example, it would make no sense for me to put related diseases and then put all this information about parovirus, all this information about that dog whooping cough that they get, and all that just becomes onerous and it spreads your SEO wealth way too thin. So just again, what you should be considering during wireframing and IA, the more and more you add to a page, the more you're spreading yourselves thin. And then if you just kind of think about when you're building out the wireframes, a good question to ask, is this page trying to do too much? If the answer is yes, then simplify it and put it on another page. Again, don't go crazy with paragraphs in Layout Builder. I've seen it done where a client gets access to paragraphs and they're slightly technical and they're like, oh, this is amazing, and they put 500 elements on a page and then they destroy their SEO for that page. Consider your navigation. So making sure that when you're going through your menu, you're thinking about how those links will turn into URLs and how much space you have left in order to ensure that someone in a Google result can actually see your whole link and is not getting the ellipse at the end. And so really during this stage, the easiest way to put it is now's the time that you just don't want to shoot yourself in the foot. You haven't done anything wrong yet, so now's the point that you just want to make sure you're not setting yourself backwards. So let's go through the actual design. So hopefully this starts scrolling. Yes. So if you kind of just look at the content, this is a super long page for their convention. We were adding headlines that are intriguing but also searchable. So you'll see a headline that's convince your boss. That's something that's just intriguing. We're not actually trying to rank for that, but when this refreshes and goes back to the top, we want to rank for when this convention is, where is it, how long will it take. I want to search the convention news about it. I want to be able to search how to get a certificate while I'm at the convention. Think about when you attend DrupalCon, maybe one thing you would search ahead of time is how can I become an Acquia certified site builder for D8? You want to be able to find that information, and when you have these convention pages, and Drupal does a really good job about that on the events.drupal.org, you want to make sure that a user can find all the information they need. And then you want to be thinking about the metadata, when you're starting to design everything out. So that's your page titles, your meta description. For a long page like this, you can't put everything in the meta description, so you want to just keep it general. Here is the AVMA convention, which will take place June 28th to June 30th, 2019 in Memphis, Tennessee, or wherever it is, and at the Memphis Convention Center. That's all the information you need. That's all the user's really looking for anyway. And then don't forget to add your alt text and your OG tags if you want to put this on Facebook or Pinterest or anything like that that specifically uses the Open Graph protocol. So just thinking about design as a whole, now's the point in the process where you should be thinking about all of your content. Start actually putting together the metadata. It doesn't have to be final. You're not actually writing all the content out, but you just have an idea, what the page title is going to be, what the meta description, what all that information should be, as you now should be considering that SEO wealth and not spreading yourselves thin. Alt tags, we've covered their importance. Now is the time that you want to make sure that when you're starting to add in images, one thing I've seen is designers poorly name images when they're just putting it all in a PSD file. So it will be like a favicon.svg. That might be, that's a bad example, but it'll be like header_2.svg. That provides no context for what that actual image is displaying. So the engineer is just going to plug that in. But if you change that name to something more specific, like what the alt text should be, that would be really helpful for the engineer to just grab that page, to grab that image name, and then change the alt text. Conversion rate, I kind of skipped that, bouncing around. How will that page perform? You need to be thinking about during design that what's the goal of this page? If I have a product page, my goal is to sell the product. So how will I do everything to make sure that that page converts without taking away too much from the user experience? And content. So, like I started to mention, it doesn't have to be final content right now, but you need to understand the story that you're going to tell and understand the user experience that you're going to be, walking the user through. You're like going to be the Sherpa guiding them through the entire experience with your website. And so again, now is the point where, you're past not shooting yourselves in the foot. Now you're trying to make strides forward, and you want to make sure that everything is laid out. So when the engineer is building the page and when the client or whoever's adding in the content, that they have a structured path to follow. So we've designed a beautiful site. Now we have to build it. So what do engineers need to know when building out everything? Really, I like to phrase it more like, what are engineers supposed to not forget? Everyone already knows this. Much like designers, developers, they're integral to SEO. They're the ones who actually are building it. What do you need to make sure that you just you're not in the zone of just building, especially when you're theming a site and going through all of that. It's just things you want to make sure you don't forget. So there are the basic modules that should be on your list, and if there's anything you should be taking notes for, and if you're an engineer, this is like the simplest thing. This is our base SEO package that we install on every site. So you have your Metatags module. This is the OG SEO module. See if you got that pun. This will help you add meta items to all your nodes. This is your SEO best friend. This is something that you should install on every Drupal website that you work on. The next two are kind of an either or. You can use Google Tag Manager or Google Analytics. So if you are just tracking data with Google Analytics, you can use that. But if you're going to be adding in a lot of external JavaScript-based tags to the sites, say if you're adding in like a Hotjar tag and a Facebook tag and this pixel and that pixel, that's going to destroy your page speed. Whoops. That's going to destroy your page speed. So the one thing we recommend using is Google Tag Manager. Plug it all in there. It will fire only one URL that's like technically a CDN, and that will help just also with like just overall maintenance. Google Tag Manager is a really good non-technical tool. So that's an either or that you should install. Rabbit Hole. This is not really like an SEO module, but is actually really useful for redirects and page URLs and how you're actually mapping out all that stuff. I'm not going to really go into that further than that. I think that it's just something that's pretty self-explanatory to use. It's just when you want to redirect content to or from a page, you use the rabbit hole module, and it will automatically add a 301 from whatever URL you want to navigate to. The XML sitemap, really important. People need to be able to find your site, so add this module, set up your sitemap, and then you literally just paste it into Google Search Console, and it will say, cool, I can read this sitemap, or it will say, actually, there are some errors, here's how you can fix it. And this is how the sitemap, it gets indexed by Google, X times per day. And so this is how content that you publish immediately gets found on Google. So, for example, the New York Times sitemap gets crawled like every 10 seconds, basically. So anytime they publish an article, it's immediately on Google, and that's something that, and that's because they're just crawling their sitemap over and over and over again. So that's something you need to make sure you have installed. And so I'm going to run through, I'm just kind of looking at time. I'm going to run through setting up the meta tag module and how that should work, and then kind of skip the rest. The setup for all those other modules is rather simple, and I'll just kind of look at their benefits instead. So the meta tags module, just a kind of a brief overview of it. On the left, you have your settings. On the config page, the kind of tags. Look at all the different options they give you. You don't need to add that all in. So this is an example for a client that they just have, your basic tags, your advanced tags, and the Open Graph protocol. They don't care about anything else. They give you a ton of options that you can dive into, but this is kind of like our base. The only other thing I'd recommend maybe for this client is to add Twitter cards if they are really engaging on Twitter, but if not, that's not something that's the end-all be-all. And on the right, you have the fields provided on the content type itself. So, the big two that if you're going to be doing anything with SEO and that correlates most to how your content is displayed on Google is your title and description. So your title, the meta tags module will add in these parameters. So it's just going to pull in the page title / site name or the pipe site name, and then description is just going to pull in the summary. So the page title, I recommend keeping that under 90 characters. People have a really short, people just, they skim and they want to be able to get the gist. So that's something I would just recommend. You can update this for content. If it's a basic page on your site, I recommend just kind of leaving it as this. But if you're publishing a lot of blogs and a lot of content, I recommend writing your own page titles and making them a little more SEO friendly if necessary. And again, keeping that under 90 characters. And then the description. So this is the one I always recommend updating for every single page, because the node summary will pull in the first 320 characters of body copy on the page. And it is a very rare occurrence that the best description of a page is the first 300 characters that are on it. Take the time and write your own meta description and write something between 100 and 300 characters. Don't go crazy, but that's something that actually translate the most into what someone's seeing on a Google result. And then here's just like a quick run through of the module settings on the actual page. So you have your basic tags, that's the generic stuff for all SEO. We've talked about that at length. And this will pull into social media unless you've identified it otherwise. Your advanced tags, so if you have multilingual content, you should be using the advanced tags, setting up your hreflangs, making sure that you're distinguishing content between, English, so like EN-US for English in the US, or you could be like German and you could be like DE for your Deutsch, and then for Germany, and that's still really important for the advanced stuff. Setting up your canonical URL, don't really recommend changing that unless you really know what you're doing and updating your URL, and that's what will display in the Google snippet. And then, I don't know where it is on the scroll, but when it gets down to the Open Graph tags, these are used mainly for Facebook. I recommend getting in the habit of updating these, especially if your user personas, if you're looking at analytics and you have users like above the age of 40, that age group loves interacting with Facebook, and you want to make sure that your content is optimized. I know people are laughing, think about how all of our moms are on Facebook. It's so annoying. So none of us are anymore. So then, analytics and tag manager, it's a super basic setup. You just literally add the module, add your container ID or analytics ID, and you're off. And then when you get into tag manager, you can add all of your tags right here directly. This has the main benefit of increasing your page speed, which is a ranking factor, because you'll be firing all of your tags at once instead of putting 10 tags in the head, because when you load the page, they're going to crawl all that first. And so if you can take that from 1 second down to milliseconds, you're really you're increasing your page speed and increasing the user experience. You can add events here. So you can track your CRO and you can do this. These will pull in automatically into Google Analytics. I found that really useful for just, we have facets on this page and we just create an event. So when someone engages with that facet, then it gets tracked as an event. Super simple. Also, I love this for just ease of use. Anyone can use it, and instead of having an engineer needing to do this, any non-technical person can go in and literally just paste in the tag. And then, so this is actually the config for the XML sitemap. Again, basic config to set up. You just need to set up your sitemap URL and the content which you would like to include in the sitemap, organized by your content type. So you want to make sure that everything that's here is getting pulled into Google result, and then you'll be able to actually go to your website. You go to your domain /sitemap.xml or sitemap_index.xml. You can name it whatever you want. And so this is super important because you plug this in to Google Search Console and it spits out this report. And it will say, so this is like for a smaller site, we have 115 valid links on the site. We have no errors. If there was an error, they would say, hey, this link is formatted wrong, or this page is generating a 404 and it's in your sitemap. You should change that. And so this is how, when you publish something, you want to run this report or just check it and see if Google's crawled it. So if you've published, say, a new blog post that's really timely and it has to do with something that happened today and you want to get it out as quick as possible and get it to rank, what you do is you publish it on your Drupal website, you check your sitemap, make sure it's there, you go to Google Search Console and you click this button that says request indexing. It's super easy. Google tends to index that page within a couple hours. They tell you it's up to 48, but it's usually in 2 to 3. It's pretty quick. Or you can just wait until your next full website indexing, and you can go to your index report in Google Search Console, and you'll see, how many URLs on your site are being crawled per day, and that includes all of your media files and everything. And so this, just module in general helps, or this tool in general just helps a ton with SEO. These errors are a ranking factor, and so when you plug this in, it will give you all the information you need to know and how to fix it. Okay, that was a lot of stuff. So there's just always more to learn with SEO. I didn't cover everything, but I hope that you learned some things from this talk. And honestly, I hope that you just realized that you were like, oh, I knew that. That makes sense. And now you just need to apply that. If you have any other thoughts on SEO, I'd love to hear them. And now we can take some questions. Any questions? Yeah.
How important is it to have your key information as static content on your page rather than JavaScript overlays that might be dynamically loaded after someone's on your page?
So you mean is this kind of like the basic about stuff, like that should be static?
So the most important stuff needs to be static.
Yep.
If it's stuff that you click to load, it doesn't help you much.
No, it should be static. Unless then you have that stuff that's clicking to load, you could, put that in like descriptions and anything like that, or then get really into like your advanced tags and make sure that you're wrapping whatever you're putting in that JavaScript element. You can wrap that in an additional like tag identifier, and that's where like the in-depth Metatags module stuff comes to play. But I would recommend just keeping that as static content. I'm happy to talk more about that after. Maybe go through an example. Any other questions? Cool. Well, thank you all. Have a great rest of your day and enjoy lunch.